On August 11th, leader of the terrorist group Oleksandr Zakharchenko announced the counterattack of the so-called Donetsk militia. Not answering the question where the manpower and military hardware came from, he did not mention the readiness of rank-and-file Russian troops to invade the territory of Ukraine. And already after 2 days, the units of the 18th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade of the Russian Army started the battle against Ukrainian troops. Then the situation became seriously escalated. From August 13th to August 18th, in the battles with terrorists and Russian troops, 95 Ukrainian officers were killed. Absolutely not concerned about the safety of the local civilian population, the militants actively fired multiple rocket launchers at the villages from the roads along them. In the area of Luhansk, the situation was relatively successful. Units of ATO forces even entered the city, having taken siege of 2 districts. On August 18th, the villages of Maloivanivka, Andrianopol and Chernukhine were liberated. There were battles for Nizhna Krinka and Stanitsa Luhanska. At the same time, the situation in Donetsk region was much more dramatic. The 1st Battalion of the 30th Brigade, which successfully operated in the area of Musinsk, turned out to be in isolation without supply. The Mounts of Urmahila, from which the Ukrainian artillery fire was retargeted at the troops coming from Russia, turned from an observation post into a forward position. The collapse of the defense, especially in the absence of shortage of reserves of food rations and ammunition, happens on the domino principle. Even a dominating position will not be able to hold on for a long time without backup and supplies. The enemy attacked Savur-Mohila, the defense of which was led by Colonel Hordichuk. A garrison of 10 soldiers managed to repel attacks for a few days. On August 18th, reinforcement broke through to the height, which made it possible to rotate the soldiers and take away the wounded. What is remarkable is that, realizing the importance and danger of the task, only volunteers set off for Savur-Mohila. Some of them weren't even registered as members of the armed forces, as they arrived in the ATO zone just the day before. Unfortunately, there were no other reserves. Each person was on the account, and Colonel Gordichuk, with the commander of a group of Crimean volunteers Yuldashev, refused to rotate and also remained in position. On the same day, near the village of Novokaterinivka, the Ukrainian military forces came under fire from the Urahan rocket launcher for the first time. Reconnaissance operations of targets and the adjustment of artillery fire were carried out with the use of the military unmanned area vehicles Orlan-10. Russia supplied the militants with full complexes of state-of-the-art armaments, and the version about the alleged origin of these weapons systems among the militants is basically untenable. On the same day, August 18th, terrorists fired on a convoy of civilians leaving the city of Luhansk. As a result of these bombarding, 17 civilians were killed and 6 were hospitalized. On August 18th, in Donetsk region, Donbas and Dnipro volunteer units, in cooperation with the consolidated company of the 51st Brigade and the armored vehicles of the 17th Brigade, came to the western part of Ilovaisk and entrenched on its outskirts. A week before this, the forces of the 40th Battalion of the Territorial Defense occupied roadblocks on the approaches to the city, which created favorable conditions for the assault. The next day, August 19th, the situation escalated. The terrorists did not hide the fact that they were firing multiple rocket launchers. Indeed, they openly admitted this in the mass media. At the same time, the volunteer units Azov, Donbas and Dnipro 1 entered Ilovaisk, where combat on the streets of the city flared up. The city itself, being a large transportation hub, was divided into 2 parts by a railway station. This was the 3rd attempt at an assault. Despite the resistance of the militants, they managed to seize and occupy the western district of the city and gain a foothold in the railway depot. The reinforcements from Russia broke through Luhansk. A column of Russian military hardware and soldiers made its way into the besieged city city from the side of Mykolaiivka. These actions helped strengthen the collapsing defense of the militants and tip the balance of power of the military forces in the region. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, on August 20th, the Russian artillery dealt a massive blow to the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in Herohivka. Then a swift assault from Roskishne followed. 2 units of the 234th Parachute Regiment of the 76th Airborne A Division from Pskov and the motorized rifle unit of the Russian 15th Motorized Rifle Brigade were involved in the operation. As a result of the attack, 2 Ukrainian roadblocks were destroyed. The strategic height of the Sarmat, which was defended by the fighters of the 24th Brigade and the Storm Volunteer Unit, was surrounded. In response to this, all of the available artillery units opened fire on the Russian troops. A couple of Mi-24P attack helicopters also flew in to support the troops. As a result of the counterattack of the Ukrainian army, the Russians retreated, losing hardware, and more than 25 soldiers were killed. According to intelligence data, the losses of the Russian paratroopers were even higher, since one of the units completely lost their combat capability and was withdrawn back to Russian territory. Fighting for independence on August 20th, 6 Ukrainian soldiers and 2 pilots died in a battle for the peak of the Sarmat. At the same time, in the city of Ilovaisk, in Donetsk region, the battles for the city continued. Moreover, the Russian media reported about the arrival in the city of the battalions of the Vostok and Oplot militias, but militants taken into captivity turned out to be Russian paratroopers. At the same time, in the area of Savur-Mohyla, another tragic event unfolded when the soldiers of the 51st Brigade finally managed to withdraw from the Petrovsky village. The unit headed by Hordichuk stayed its ground, practically in the rear of the advancing enemy. Then the Ukrainian artillery was for the most part suppressed or forced to retreat, and its strikes were becoming less effective. On August 20th, the Russian troops launched another assault on Savur-Mohyla. Despite the shelling on this day, the positions were maintained. On August 21st, in Luhansk region, there were defensive battles in the area of Preshchivate and Novosvitlivka. The armed forces of Ukraine liberated Stanitsa Luhanska. During the day, 17 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. The next day, the so-called humanitarian convoy crossed the border of Ukraine. 145 vehicles transporting food, fuel, and ammunition crossed the border at the Izvarene checkpoint. The Security Service of Ukraine called this act a direct invasion on the part of the Russian Federation into the territory of Ukraine. But it was more of a formal statement, because Russian troops had already been present in the areas of Luhansk, Donetsk, Novozovsk, and Ilovaisk, where the Russian artillery had already shelled Ukrainian territory. On the border, in full readiness, there were 8 battalions of tactical regiments with heavy artillery. On August 21st to 22nd, units of the 93rd Brigade attempted to recapture the village of Petrovsky near the Savur-Mohyla mound. However, having lost 2 armored combat vehicles, the unit forced to retreat. The group of Colonel Hordichuk continued to fight while surrounded on the hill. After several months of the summer campaign, soldiers who were mobilized on the wave of patriotic uplifting were simply exhausted. Furthermore, the morale of the soldiers of many units of the military was in sharp decline, and at the same time, Russian propaganda added insult to injury through the regular daily news. On August 22nd, near Kuteynikove village, the positions of the 5th Battalion of Territorial Defense were shelled. The soldiers in the garrison of the checkpoint left their positions as they were demoralized by moving from the border of other units and reports of enemy tanks near Savur-Mohyla. On August 23rd, the press service of the headquarters of the armed forces of the so-called DPR reported about the formation of an additional 3 infantry units and a change in tactics of warfare, despite the fact that this army has long been formed. Soldiers were waiting for some time at the border, and upon command, Russian troops launched a massive offensive. Artillery units of the Russian armed forces, up to 6 divisions, fired on the positions of the Ukrainian army from its territory. After the departure of Ukrainian troops from Izvarine and Dolzhansky, the focus of the fire impact shifted to the second echelon of Ukrainian defense. As a result, unable to withstand the attacks, the whole 5th Battalion left its position and left the ATO zone. Despite an order to take new positions, most of the soldiers refused to continue their service, and the unit simply left the ATO zone in order to return to their permanent bases where there was safety. In connection with the retreat of the neighbors, the 19th Mykolaiv Regiment of the National Guard defeated the enemy by organizing an ambush near the village of Lysyche, but then moved to the Komsomolsk area. The unit's tactical group of the 28th Brigade retreated from Ambrosiivka, and most of the soldiers later pulled out of the ATO zone. Only 18 of them stayed behind. A lot of harm was done by both the Russian propaganda and Ukrainian journalists who wanted to find some fresh news. The latter, in pursuit of fame, did not bother to check the information of Russian propaganda and informed about the death of Ukrainian soldiers. Some officers also succumbed to panic. Due to this, the Ukrainian front collapsed on the domino principle. By the evening of August 23rd, in the area of Ambrosiivka, the first line of defense ceased to exist. Without facing any resistance, 8 tactical units of the Russian armed forces, totaling about 4,000 soldiers, entered the territory of Ukraine. An offensive was launched in the direction of Torez, Severodonetsk, and Mariupol. It was then that the way to Ilovaisk, where the battles continued in the city, was opened. The 2nd Territorial Defense Unit left the position, which covered up the approaches to the city of Ilovaisk from the side of Donetsk. The remnants of the 28th Tactical Unit went to Starobesheva. The units of the 51st Brigade, which served at checkpoints to the south of Donetsk, also abandoned their positions and retreated to the Berezova area. The information pressure of the Russian media and the hysteria injected into the internet played their destructive role. This is the principle in tactic: frighten, divide, and conquer. Not understanding the general state of affairs on the fronts and not having communication and coordination with other military units and high command staff, some units simply abandoned their positions. In some cases, they even threw away heavy military hardware. The task of any propaganda is to form the necessary public opinion. When it comes to war, the issue is about average civilians' trust in the leadership and about the fighting spirit of the soldiers. A person who does not believe in victory will never fight. Convincing Ukrainians to doubt in the success of their struggle and creating some psychological panic among them was exactly the task of Russian propagandists. August 24th is the Independence Day of Ukraine. On this day, a military parade was held every year in Kiev. The fact that mainly the cadets of military schools and the troops of the Kiev garrison participated in the parade did not have the credibility on the backdrop of total enemy disinformation. First and foremost, Ukraine needed this parade to prevent panic among the civilian population so that they would have faith in a strong army and believe in the promising future of their country. A weakened country will not once end up in a difficult situation, both in the diplomatic and military sense. But if citizens of the country learn about such an ugly truth about the current situation, then this will lead to nothing other than lineups in stores and disorder on the streets. Russian troops took their positions on the border with Chernihiv region. In order to return the so-called order and the puppet government to Kiev, the Russian Federation needed only 2 things: any appropriate motive and a few hours along the Chernihiv highway. In Donetsk, there was another parade held. Militants convoyed Ukrainian prisoners along Artoma, the main street of the city. Some of these soldiers were bandaged. Supporters of the DPR threw eggs and water bottles at the prisoners in an attempt to strike them and show their hatred towards them. At the same time, situation in the ATO zone changed every hour. Ukrainian troops retreating from the border opened up the way to Ilovaisk for the enemy. In the city, the volunteer units and the armed forces units fought bravely. Despite the overall pandemonium, Ukraine continued to resist the attacks of the enemy forces. All available Ukrainian artillery and aviation worked full speed ahead against the Russian forces. In the area of the Shevchenko village, 2 Mi-24 helicopters struck Russian paratroopers. In the area of Hrashchevate and Novosvitlivka, missiles delivered a combined blow to a command post and technical hardware of one of the Russian tactical groups. On August 24th, in the afternoon, information was received on the change in positions of enemy hardware near Ilovaisk. The identified targets were fired upon and the 331st Unit of Russian Airborne Forces was defeated. Soldiers of Ukraine's 51st Brigade captured 100 Russian soldiers. All of the detained soldiers did not deny that there were members of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The front was broken, and the reasons for this were the insufficient training of the mobilized Ukrainian army, the lack of experience of the commanding personnel, and the lack of moral and psychological support of the country's military personnel. August 24, 2014, the army of the Russian Federation entered the territory of Ukraine. Russian paratroopers of the 333rd Unit, 8th and 19th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigades, the 31st and 56th Separate Assault Battalions started to block the movement of Ukrainian troops in Ilovaisk. So the Russian Federation treacherously and irrationally invaded the territory of Ukraine.